Hey, it's Jamie from jamieedwards.com again, and today I want to talk to you about why DevOps might not be working at your company. There's a lot of fake news about it out there, and I want to clear up some confusion to hopefully help you, if your company is thinking about doing DevOps, actually get the benefits that it's meant to serve to your company and not get persuaded or confused by the industry and some of the big players and what they're trying to make it sound like it's really all about. So first, let me talk about how this got to be such a confusing topic in the industry. Usually when I find in the software development industry a new term or a new technology or technique or process kind of gets confusing, the simple way to find out why this has happened is to follow the money. So the first thing that you need to understand is that DevOps is really a subset of continuous delivery. And I did another video that you can go back and watch on that to understand what that means. But really, continuous delivery is just about how does a software development team get set up so they can release new versions of their software to their customers quicker. Now, tool vendors are the big thing that I think you need to be aware of as far as why this is so confusing in the industry. When Microsoft and Amazon and Rackspace and a lot of the other vendors got involved in the DevOps movement about 5 to 7 years ago, around the time that the continuous delivery and DevOps books started circulating and people started reading them, there was a lot of money to be made in pushing your application that you might be running on premise or in a data center to the cloud. And so I watched all the big technology names suddenly start to use DevOps as the term that they wanted to use to try to get your company to really move to their infrastructure. And while to do continuous delivery and do DevOps, which I'm going to clarify for you and talk about today, you do need to at some point have a situation where you can deploy your development, test, and production environments quickly. You need to have the ability to push releases out quickly. That's not really the core of what DevOps is about. You can actually do DevOps without spending any extra money. So the third thing that I want to talk a little bit about is that you also need to be very careful if you're out there talking to consultants or looking at big thought leaders in the industry that talk about DevOps, because they'll often talk about why they can come in and help your company do DevOps. But if the first thing that you hear them talk about when they talk about helping you do DevOps is automating your deployments and automating your testing and creating DevOps positions, I'm here to tell you, as someone who's been involved in this movement quite a bit and seen it go wrong, and this is what I want to prevent from happening to your career or your company, that actually is not going to help your company truly achieve DevOps and get the big benefits that it was meant to serve. And the last thing I think that's made it very confusing in the industry when people try to understand what is DevOps, what's it buying us, and maybe you're trying to do it at your company, but it doesn't seem to be delivering on its promises, is that recruiters out there look at DevOps as a new position that they can hire people into. It's a way for them to make more money. Companies that are confused about DevOps think they can hire someone in with the title of DevOps or DevOps engineer or DevOps architect, and suddenly they're doing DevOps. And while I understand that there are positions sometimes where people might have more experience around this than maybe strictly software development, it really misses the point completely. So why did DevOps come to be, and what is it? Well, there's many videos across YouTube and across the internet that'll give you a little bit more information on maybe some of the different technical aspects of DevOps, but I really want to focus on one thing, because this is the reason, in my opinion, and when I've seen this, why companies will spend millions of dollars trying to do DevOps and then be frustrated that it doesn't seem to be delivering on its promises. What DevOps really is, and this all came to be out of the UK probably about 10 to 12 years ago, it's written about in Jez Humble's book on continuous delivery, is DevOps was really a realization that most companies had operations people, and they were responsible for keeping the production system that your customers of your software use, the live environment up and running and stable. And you also have developers, people who want to introduce new change. They want to build new features and deploy it to that production environment. And in most companies, there's sort of a wall between those two groups of people. In many companies, even companies that do DevOps, there are people who are operations personnel and they report to one manager. And then there's developers and they report to a different manager. And so the motivation between these groups of people is different. Operations people want to keep the system running. They want it stable. They don't want to introduce change. Developers, on the other hand, are being paid to produce features. So what DevOps is really about, in my opinion, is how do you get those two groups of people to work together better so they actually want the same thing? So why doesn't DevOps work? Well, first I'll tell you a quick story about a client I had. This was probably about 7 or 8 years ago here in Austin, a large international grocer. And this company had a product that they used at all their different stores. And it was one of their main software products that they built. And when I was brought in to help this client, at that time, it was pretty hilarious that their development team had automation in place. In other words, they had scripts and technology where somebody could click a button and kick something off, and it would take the latest build of their software and do a whole bunch of, fancy things to it, automated testing, and place it in the development environment, or it would place it in a UAT or testing environment. But when that same build of the software was ready to go into production, the people who were in charge of operations and the live environment would not run the automated tests. They would not run the automated deployment. They refused to touch it. And they actually required the development team to write them Word documents that described, first you need to copy these files here, then you need to go into this setting and change this, and basically told them in English everything that they needed to do to deploy the software for which they'd already automated in the other environments. And I think this story really underlines the cultural difference when you don't have DevOps in place between developers and operations. Here we had the operations team basically holding the development team hostage and saying, if you want to get changes into our environment, you have to follow our procedures, for which the developers felt they had a better solution. And I actually agreed with them at that point. So if you're at a company where they're doing DevOps, but there's a different group of people that manage production than development, and they don't work together and they don't use the same tools, and operations has the power to refuse development from doing things, and they don't really have the same motivation, that's probably a sign that your company isn't really doing DevOps. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is I have a good friend who worked at several companies over the past 5 years doing DevOps types of work. And when he first kind of got into the industry and he got into doing this type of work, he was really excited, like everybody is, about the automated deployment technologies. There's a lot of buzz in the industry. There's a lot of new tools coming out. But he got really frustrated as he continued to work with the fact that these companies seem to be not really cleaning things up. They seem to not be really getting people to work together. Even though they had a lot of advanced deployment technology in place, nobody seemed to really actually be getting the product out quicker, and everybody was still under the same type of stress. And he read Continuous Delivery and the DevOps Handbook and some of the other books, the really good resources that are out there. And he quickly realized that his company, although they had many DevOps employees, wasn't really doing DevOps. And one of the last companies he worked for, this really blew my mind. They actually had a development department, which were all the people who were developers. Then they had an ops department, which were the people who ran the production servers. And these two groups had been in place for years. And they created a new DevOps department to sit between the two. And, if you heard what I just said to you earlier in the video, this completely misses the point. Instead of bringing these two groups of people together, they actually created a new group that sits between the two, which is actually even worse than having the two separate before. So again, one thing you might want to look out for if you think you're buying the fake news out there about DevOps and you're kind of getting persuaded by the consultants and the tool vendors in the industry trying to make money off the DevOps movement, is the first thing to look at is, are your people working together closer and better? And are they sharing skills? So one thing that many experts will tell you about DevOps is the first thing that you need to do to achieve DevOps is to build a bunch of automation, automate your testing, automate your builds, automate your infrastructure. And while that absolutely is a set of tasks that you want to go through at your company eventually to make it easier for these two groups to work together, it's actually funny that I've worked with some companies as a consultant over the last 5 years that think they're doing DevOps and they have all this technology in place, but they can't get their product out any quicker because they still have these two groups separate. So they look at it like, well, we'll invest in technology, we'll bring in some experts, we'll maybe move to the cloud, we'll use, Terraform or any of the other automated deployment and automated infrastructure provisioning technologies out there. And then maybe eventually, once we're, smoother and we're using all these technologies, we'll find a way to bring those two groups of people together. What I would actually tell you that you should do differently, and you can go back and watch, I did a video on the journey to cross-functional teams, is the first thing I think a company should do if they want to do DevOps is they have to actually figure out from a personal level, how do I get my operations people and my developers to care about the same things? And usually this starts with there needs to be a change in the organizational structure. There needs to no longer be a head of operations and a head of development, and they maybe report to one person, and it's up to that one manager above both of them to keep them both happy and in line. Instead, when I've seen companies do this successfully, and I've had success myself at coming into companies and helping them change to this kind of work approach, one of the first things to do is to actually bring those people into the same room when they do their work. In other words, instead of operations having, let's say, a backlog or a list of the work that they do, and developers having a backlog or a list of work that they do, those people, when let's say you're doing Scrum and you have weekly sprints and you have daily Scrums, well, instead of those teams having their own Scrum meetings, they need to be in the same meetings. And that's really what a cross-functional team is. It's really when the developers are thinking about introducing a change, instead of them writing a bunch of code and throwing it over the wall and telling operations, hey, you figure out how to run this in production, operations people need to actually be in the room during the design discussions all the time. And that's really the only way to get them both to care about the same thing. Now, what's going to happen at first when your company starts doing this is there's going to be some friction and confusion. There may be people who've been doing operations for years and they've got a certain set of skills and they've got a certain set of concerns, and they probably understand infrastructure and security and change management maybe a little bit better than developers might. And developers might understand object-oriented programming and testing and validation and some of these things a little bit better. But really, when I've seen companies transform into one that can truly benefit from DevOps and hence get their product out much quicker and more often, it's when operations people start to learn the skills developers have. They become full-fledged programmers, and developers start to care more about the production environment. They start to understand infrastructure. So if you're going to move your company into doing DevOps, that's one of the best things you can do, is actually plan for and bring someone in that understands how to make the organizational change and to sit with people and help them through that transition. And a lot of this is people skills. It's really helping the people care about each other. It's putting shared rewards in place. So if the product's successful, everybody gets rewarded. If the product fails, everybody gets penalized. And I talked about that again in that Journey to Cross-Functional Teams video. Now, at the end of the day, if you can get those groups of people unified, it really is going to get to a point where to keep those two groups able to introduce change to the production environment, whether it's code or configuration or new infrastructure nodes or new monitoring tools, new security policies, any of that stuff, there is going to have to be some automation in place if your company is going to be able to get those changes out quickly enough. But I just want to encourage you to hear what I'm telling you here, and to not get dissuaded by some of the confusion in the industry, and know that if you really want your company to really benefit from DevOps, and maybe you're someone who's a developer or you're in operations and you're trying to understand, what does this mean to my job, or how do I make this change smooth at my company? Know that if your company is not doing anything to try to change the organizational structure, and you as, let's say, an operations person are not invited to the daily Scrum meetings with the development team, you're not really benefiting from DevOps. And you can have all the automation and scripting and technology that everybody else in the industry will tell you is great in place, and still have a lot of friction and frustration across the departments in the team. So how is your company dealing with their DevOps transformation, or just getting better at DevOps? Leave me some comments below. If you're on YouTube and you're new to my channel, please subscribe. You can click the little bell icon and you'll be notified when there's updates. I'm also on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud if you want to listen to this instead as a podcast, and you can like me on Facebook. So until next time, thanks.